on a Saturday morning enjoying my Saturday, and I get served for some weeds that are in the alley of Squires Road, and I didn't have a number on it. That's absurd, but that's okay. That's another matter. I'll be here in court, and I took care of that problem. But who's serving this guy? Who? Why do we have 26 inoperable vehicles allowed on a house in Castle Hills Estates? I know you're not supposed to engage me, and that's fine, but I wanted to bring this to your attention. It's not good. It's just not good. And it's costing me money. If I wanted to sell the house right now, I couldn't. And if I had to, I'd have to ask at least 100,000 less, because all I have to do is look across. And when you drive over 410 now, which is de facto Castle Hills property, you can see it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. As you know, we can't,
I understand.
sorry, this mic's a little hot. We can't respond, but we can, communicate with you and address your concerns otherwise. So hopefully, you've already communicated with the city manager and we'll talk with him as
I
well.
appreciate that. Thank you all.
Thank you all for being here. Okay, next up, we have Robert Wynn.
Good evening, I'm Robert Wynn, 209 Garden View. I wanted to enter into the record the memo I sent over to the city staff on Friday regarding the phase 1 and 2 Banyan Carrollwood receipts. Attached are receipts totaling $4,753,000, $753,142 for drainage and roadway improvements related to flooding caused by City of San Antonio's water trespass onto City Castle Hills property. The total indicated amount, or contract amount, is $5,168,867 for the 2 phases. The difference appears to be the amount paid by SAWS. I'm hereby requesting that you direct the city manager of Castle Hills to formally request reimbursement from the City of San Antonio for said expenditures on behalf of Castle Hills taxpayers. The expenditures are a direct result of the City of San Antonio's negligence in not controlling its watershed, which has caused flooding in Castle Hills. The total receipts of $4,753,142 are evidence of the city's Castle Hills mitigating its damages, in addition to all interest paid on bonds issued for payment of same. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wynn. Okay, next we have consent agenda. Do we have any motions? Mr. May.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the city council adopt the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. May. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Joyce. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Okay, before we get into new business, I wanted to move the agenda around just a little bit and start with the announcements of mayor and council members. I know it's a little bit off guard there, Miss Haley, but it's with good reason. I wanted to take a moment to recognize our council colleague, Mr. Isbrand, and today will be his last meeting. And it was important to me that we're able to recognize him while everybody's here and captive until it's 9 o'clock or maybe 10 o'clock tonight. We can go extra long for you, Mr. Isbrand. But really wanted to thank you for your service to the city of Castle Hills and wish you well. And I will say my part, and I'll go around the room and see if there's anybody else that wants to. And we also have a small token of appreciation. We'll start with Mr. Joyce and we'll end with you.
Thanks, Mayor. And I certainly reiterate the points you've made. I think Councilman Isbrand has done a tremendous job in just the few years that he's been here. I think one of the arguably greatest things he's done for us is bring about a new sense of civility to our public discourse. And in addition to that, he's a tremendous communication guy. That is what he does. But never have we seen all of the information going out on the city's Facebook page and the various Castle Hills websites as a result of Mr. Isbrand's staying in touch with things and helping us citizens stay in touch with things as well. So, sir, thank you. We owe you a debt of gratitude.
Mr. May.
Mr. Mayor and fellow council members, I just want to take this moment to express how much a joy it's been to work with you, Joe. We are kind of in the same freshman class. We came in together on the same agenda, promoting civility, transparency, and moving things forward for Castle Hills. You're going to be a hard act to follow. We're going to try hard to find that replacement maybe later tonight. But for the community, I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of the work that we do is done off grid. It's done at 10 o'clock at night. It's done on a Sunday afternoon. On those joint projects that we've had together, you've always picked up the phone. You've always had the good ideas. You've always been the messenger that gets the word out to the community. So for those who are here to hear, I want to challenge you to look at Joe as the model and reach out to him or any of us. He has done a fantastic job, and I thank you for moving the direction of this city.
Ms. Haley?
I could say what Mr. Joyce and what Mr. May said, and I'll add to that. What I have always appreciated the most about Joe Isbrand is that he's never worn all the things that he's done and all the things that he knows and all the things that he can do. He just does them. And he has committed himself and raised the bar for all of us to be excellent at what we do, to do what's right, to look at a big picture, be objective, be fair. And Joe, I'll miss you. You're only going up the street, but I have enjoyed knowing you over these years, and I appreciate you. And I think the whole community does too. And that's not to say other people on this council and prior members have not done a great job as well, but no one's done it the way you have and brought it the way you did. So thank you.
I guess you won't come back to this agenda item at the end. So what I had anticipated saying then, I guess I need to say now. So first of all, thank you all for the very kind comments. It's been a pleasure. As I depart tonight, I'd like to offer a few thank yous to the many people who give their time to the city of Castle Hills and making it such a great place to live. And first to our civic organizations, particularly the Castle Hills Community Organization, which holds countless events for our residents each year. To the Castle Hills Women's Club for hosting ribbon cuttings and welcoming events for our new businesses. And to the Castle Hills Garden Club, whose efforts are making Castle Hills an even more beautiful place to live. Thank you. To all the residents who give their time to serve on our boards, committees, and commissions, you're making a real difference in the quality of life here. We need more residents to step up and serve. Thank you. To the city staff, administration, courts, city secretary, to the police, fire, and public works departments and the extraordinary crews they have, and to their leaders, Mr. Harada, Chief Ladwig, and Chief Zuniga. And to Nora Davis, who really runs the city. That's what I want you all to know tonight. Thank all of you for your ongoing partnership. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to work with you. Thank you. And of course, to Ryan Rapoli, what a great city manager we have. Ryan, I know you'll miss my daily and sometimes hourly texts and phone calls to you. I promise I'll keep them going for a little while so you can adjust, and I hope that you won't forget me on a quiet day and go, I have no one to text or to respond to. You can always feel free to send me a message. Thank you for all you are doing to steer this city forward. I also want to extend my deep appreciation to City Attorney Mark Schnall. Mark and I have worked together for 12 years in Castle Hills on either council or commission, and 4 years previously in another city. I'll simply say he is wise and a man of integrity. And to you, the members of council, and to those who I have served with in the past, Mr. Paul and Mr. Gregory, for your constant collegiality, collaboration, and commitment to doing what's best. You never waver. Thank you. Finally, I want to thank my wife, Sig, for her tireless support, her willing sacrifice of our time together to allow me to serve, and more often than not, being right there beside me at events to champion this city. We came as a package, and I know which was the best part of that package. In a democracy, I believe we all have a duty to give something back to our community. It is not about any one of us individually, but about all of us collectively working for the common good. As I take my leave, I hope I have fulfilled my obligation. It has been a distinct honor to serve, and I thank all of you for the privilege. Thank you, Mayor.
Council, thank you all for indulging me in that. I just wanted to make sure we gave biggest audience possible for Mr. Isbrand's recognition for everything he's done for our city. To that point, Mrs. Isbrand, I'll do my best to get us out of here timely so y'all can have dinner.
And once again, I say thank you.
First item of new business is discussion of possible action on the city's contribution to the Texas Municipal Retirement System. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The last meeting, we had representatives from TMRS to discuss multiple options of how we could work to come to a 2-to-1 retirement system for the matching ratio. I know that council had asked myself and staff to review things further, possibly other options, trying to forecast revenue for the FY24 budget, which we will talk about later in the meeting. And from our standpoint, there was actually almost 8 options to choose from. And so what we did was sit down from a staff perspective and review what actually fits best for the organization, its size, capacity, revenue, all those kind of things. And what you have in front of you is option 1 and option 2. And option 1 is sort of the full blown package with 2-to-1 with 100% and the updated service credits. And then option 2 is 2-to-1 at 75%. Now, as you could tell, it goes from 19.31% down to 16.8. You know, the difference of basically 180,000 at the bottom from 1 to 5 to 107,000. I've sat down with Ms. Davis, both Chief Zuniga, Chief Ladwig to discuss this. And obviously at this point, we feel sort of the best option is option 2 in regards to doing the 2-to-1 and then the 75% service credit. We think obviously based on our early formulation of the 24 budget and our revenue projections that this is obviously achievable, and for us to be able to do other things within this budget like COLAs and or potentially revisiting the salaries for both police and fire like we talked about. And so at this case, we have Kenneth Oliver here again from TMRS in case you have particular questions. He could probably walk you through exactly what that service credit does mean. And so the idea with this agenda item is discussing this further, letting you all know that the staff has come to sort of a consensus on option 2 based on the total price and what that adjustment is from 1.5 to 2. And again, later in the agenda, we'll talk about the forecasting of revenues. And obviously, I think this is doable, easily to program into the FY24 budget at a 9-month budget that we're going to have to do. Now, I'll let Mr. Oliver talk about the service credit and what it means to change that next year if we have the revenue there, because the transfer credit, my understanding is, can be changed year to year, right, Mr. Oliver? And so when we have time next year to put together a 12-month budget, analyze and further look at the revenue, it's something we can look at doing the 100% next year in the new budget as we move forward with that 12-month budget. We're going to be starting the budget process early again because we're doing a 9-month budget. We're going to be starting the budget process probably sometime in May, if not earlier, as we work towards starting a budget October 1st, 2024. And so we think option 2 is sort of the best, and I'll leave it to Mr. Oliver to explain sort of the service credit and what that means. But from a transition of 107,000 to 107,100, we think that's easily programmable into the FY24 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. And the service credit transfer is the same thing we talked about last time, correct? Okay. Council? Do we have any questions, comments, motions? Mr. May?
Mr. Mayor, based on the recommendations of our city manager, I would propose that we adopt option 2, which is the 2-to-1 plan with the 75% repeating option.
Thank you, Mr. May. We have a second. Second by Ms. Haley. Thank you, Ms. Haley. Any discussion? Mr. May, yes, sir.
I did want to mention the reason I support this is because I think it is fiscally conservative. It gives us room. It specifically gives us a little wiggle room if in the next budgetary cycle, we want to look at salaries. But it's a start. We needed to go to the 2-to-1. I think everyone here knows that to be competitive, but I want to leave a little wiggle room so that we can incentivize in the form of salary options in our next consideration during the budgetary period.
Thank you, Mr. May. Mr. Joyce?
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is our best option. I appreciate staff working with TMRS to achieve this. And perhaps over time, we can, as Mr. Rapley suggested, maybe sweeten it up a little bit. But for now, it's a conservative approach and makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Mr. Rapley, I know that there was some of this in the backup, but can you clarify where that delta will be coming from to cover us to get to 2-to-1?
Well, originally, if we were sticking with 1.5-to-1, we were going to have to go up based on the rate 72,000. So as you'll see later in the agenda, when I go over revenue, we're on the positive side of many revenue categories for the year. And so we're optimistic that we'll continue with those in trying to work a 9-month budget. Again, I'll cover that. It's been what you might think is an easy approach to do a 9-month budget, but actually there's a little bit more forecasting to it to try to think about what actual expenditures are and what we need to program in for revenue. But we clearly think based on are optimistic with revenue, sales tax, our healthy reserve if necessary. But as Councilman May mentioned, there is that sort of wiggle room, as he called, because we need to look at salaries and we still need to look at COLAs. So I'm trying to find the best opportunity to maximize that change of 2-to-1 to be able to still do that for the employees, our police, and potentially fire, because we did talk about coming back and revisiting salaries for police as well.
Thank you. And so could you tell me, without getting there all the way, where those surpluses were, a couple of examples?
Sales tax, we're a little bit over in the ad valorem too, projections. I'm talking about year-end projections this year. So we're trying to be optimistic in some of those areas. We're well up in interest as well, almost over 100,000 in interest alone. That essentially takes care of that delta, as you call it, from that standpoint.
Okay, so based on off of that, you're confident that we can absorb the 2-to-1 expense?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Isbrand?
So I'd just like to maybe share a thought here on this. The way this is being framed up in this discussion is we're okay for the next 9 months. And this is the equivalent, I'm going to use something that speaks to me at the moment. This is the equivalent of a mortgage. This is a long-term commitment we're making. And I'm probably overstating it a little bit to say I'm a little bit dissatisfied with the notion that because sales tax revenue is up now and we're doing a 9-month budget because we're going to transition to a different calendar, that we can cover it. that because we aren't really talking about what the long-term impact of this is going to be. I really wish this conversation were actually taking place after we had the budget discussion, so we knew substantially where the money is that would pay for it, not just this coming year, this coming 9 months, but the 12 months after that, the 12 months after that, and the 12 months after that. So while I know that all of us absolutely support the direction that we're going in, the one caution that I would offer here is to really be thinking about where will this revenue come from if sales tax is down next year? If there's some fluctuation in the economy that causes, I don't know, real estate prices or whatever that affects our local economy, we may not be able to depend on the things that we're going to rely on in this 9-month period. So to suggest that we're okay because we have the money to cover it for 9 months, I don't think fully looks at the picture. And I know you all are very fiscally prudent, so I have a great deal of confidence that this will take place, but also caution that we really need to be thinking about this in the long term and the impact that it will have on the city, not just for a few months, but for decades to come potentially.
Thank you, Mr. Isbrand.
And Mayor, to Councilman Isbrand's approach, I think early as we start next year's budget, since we'll be starting a budget on October 1st, we'll get a little bit more into the details and be able to forecast better at that point. I mean, as we start with the proposed budget, we're going to start looking at expenditures for this 9-month budget, how to cut certain areas or try to meet the minimum of what we've been doing from an operating expense to make sure that we have enough to cover for this. Like, again, I'm not worried about this year, but as Mr. Isbrand says, I'm looking and forecasting years out, and that's something that we're going to have to do. But looking at FY25 and 26 is a little impossible right now for revenue. All we can do is work towards the expenditure side to try to make sure that operations are somewhat running and not say thin, but are optimal to make sure.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Council, do we have any more comments? I know we have somebody signed up to speak, so I wanted to get to that if there's no further comments. We have Mr. Paul signed up.
Sorry, Mr. Paul, I think you wanted the microphone. Is that what it was?
Let's see, do I need one?
No.
Frank Paul, 112 Shalimar. I think Councilman Isbrand's reading my mail because I believe exactly what he is saying. If you don't have in front of you budget material that tells you where this is going to be coming from, what the anticipation is next year, I don't know how you can make a decision without being in the budget process itself. Now, we have in the past, as you know, have given an indication to the city manager if we want to do X, Y, Z, not saying we're going to do it, but then see how it fits into the budget. It sounds to me like tonight, you all are trying to make a decision on moving ahead as opposed to saying, we want to see a budget coming up with X, Y, Z in it. And it's a little different than just making a decision. And as I say, Councilman Isbrand has been reading my mail on this because we don't know what next year is going to bring. And in the last meeting, I heard our city manager say, well, we're okay for this year. Well, that to me, for a planning situation, is not good. Now, I'm not saying we don't want to do this at all. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying, hey, guys, don't do this. I'm saying that let's put it in the context of the budget as a whole. And I think that would be important to see. And I know, Mayor, you've mentioned that a couple of times too. I'd like to ask one question to the TMRS man, if I may. What are the bulk of the investments in? I mean, are you real estate? Are you stock market? Are you bonds? Are you all the above?
And so, Mr. Paul, if that's your question, then
Huh?
if that's your question, we'll have Mr. Oliver come up and he can
Right.
answer that.
Yeah, because I have something about that. I'll say it now, go sit down and shut up. The reason I'm asking the question is if you have investment much in stocks, I'd like to be sure that what the state invests in is not subject to the ESG, which is obviously a common problem coming up these days. And maybe you can give an answer on that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I will try. Hello again. I get a chance to speak. Yay. Sorry. I apologize. To answer the gentleman's question, TMRS's diversified portfolio, stocks, both domestic and international, bonds, real estates, small little piece of hedge fund. They are listed on our website in multiple places. We just posted GASB 68 today, and there is a rate of return page that actually breaks out the target allocations for each of the pieces and the actual returns over the last for 2022. And that's publicly available. But short answer is a diversified portfolio. As far as the ESG, should I answer that?
And I don't see why not.
I know that there was a legislation that was coming through about that. And I'm not qualified to speak on that legislation. I'll tell you that. I know that we have a fiduciary duty to invest everybody else's money, because this is not our money. This is everybody else's money. Well, I'm in TMRS too. It's my money too. We have a fiduciary duty to invest it to maximize returns at minimal risk. So, and that is our point. We have some guardrails that are put in place by the state. If this is a new guardrail, we will certainly follow it. Otherwise, we try to get the best return for the risk portfolio. Did that answer the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions from Mr. Oliver, council? Okay. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Thank you, Mr. Oliver, for being here.
Thank you, sir.
And next up, Mr. Schnall, do we need this subsequent motion or the subsequent agenda item?
Yes, because
Yes,
it's
it's
two different.
required by
orders.
the TMRS.
Got you. Okay, thank you, sir. Discussion and possible action on ordinance number 2023-07-11 regarding the city's matching ratio to the Texas Municipal Retirement System. Mr. Rapley.
Mayor, I think Mr. Schnall can elaborate. There's two different ordinances. One has to do with the difference of the service credit in there, 100% versus 75%. I don't know if the ordinance numbers are different in there, but I think that just be part of the motion. Mr. Schnall? Huh? Same number, but the key is making sure that it's the 75% is in there. And Mayor, to answer your question, they require an ordinance to be adopted to change the retirement system.
So a motion might be made. C, you said? May I ask a question, Mayor, while we're waiting?
Yes, sir.
Is it necessary to adopt this ordinance tonight? Given the conversation that we just had, we have clearly indicated the desire of the council to take action, but we don't have budget numbers in front of us. We adopt this ordinance, we are writing into our law that this is what we're going to do. I just want to put back on the table that thought of without budgets to look at, without those conversations, are we prepared to go to the extent of adopting an ordinance?
I understand.
So there are two identical resolution or excuse me, two duplicate ordinance number 2023-07-11, with the only change being in paragraph C of section 1, kind of the middle of the first page, where the 75 is in bold. So if there is a motion, if it could be specified that the ordinance being adopted is the one that has 75% in subsection C of section 1. Mr. Isbrand's point is certainly a good point. Council can consider it, but I did just check with Mr. Oliver, and he agreed that if the council were to adopt this evening and then wanted to make a change, as long as that change was made and in the hands of TMRS before December 31, the most recently adopted ordinance would be applicable. Mr. Oliver, is that correct? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Isbrand. Okay, do we have a motion? Mr. May,
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adopt ordinance number 2023-07-11 as stated, with one exception. In subpart 1C, the 100% be substituted with a
75.
75%. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. May. Do we have a second? Ms. Haley, thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Joyce?
I like the idea of holding off on this until we have some numbers in front of us. I know we have to do this, as I said a moment ago. It's however we find the money, we're just gonna have to find the money, but I think it would be a fiduciary responsibility, in my opinion, to at least look at some numbers before we go ahead with this ordinance, which, as Mr. Isbrand said, makes it law.
Yes, sir. Ms. Haley?
Yes, and if we don't have people to perform the services for our city, we don't have a city. And if we've got to find how we're going to pay for this and looking at a budget, if we're looking at this first and we know this is going in it, maybe it's not the best way to, I don't know, here, to me, we've talked about this and talked about this. And if we're going to join other cities and do what other cities do and be competitive in this market for our people, for our staff, then we find a way that we're going to do this. And to say we have to know the numbers and be able to know what's going to happen 20 years from now, no one knows that. So we start here. This is a start. We can, if I understand correctly, we can modify this as long as we do it before the end of the year. Is that what I understood? We can update this or do what we're going to do. So we can alter this. But I think if we keep talking about, are we going to stop and start? I think we should move ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Haley.
Mayor, can I add a point? So again, moving forward, we build this into the proposed budget. I present you the proposed budget, and over time, it becomes the council adopted budget. So we have time if necessary. But from a staff perspective, from my perspective, we obviously need to know how to carve in this sort of difference now, because we're talking about the difference of 72,000 and then building in 107,000 additionally for this new option through TMRS. So I think, again, I know there's talking about the budget and revenue, but we can build this in. We just can't look, 12 months from now and say, well, what does those revenues look like until a little further down the road? Again, knowing that you can modify it before December 31st, council will have that option as well.
Thank you, Mr. Appley. Mr. Isbrand.
I think the question, Mr. Rapoli, is I appreciate building it in. The last action that we took gives clear direction to the city staff of what to build in to bring back a proposed budget. But there's not a number up here tonight to think about what the next 9 months looks like. And we're adding these additional dollars in. I agree with Ms. Haley that this should be first and foremost. But also first and foremost, I think, is our fiduciary responsibility to the city as members of council, and to make this commitment to enact this into law without ever having had a chance to look at budget and how it fits in budget and where that revenue is coming from, I think is what the concern would be. So for what it's worth, that's why I believe that it would be worthwhile to consider not taking action on this tonight. Or perhaps after we see some numbers, depending on what you want to, or you're going to present tonight around budget, to give some context and understanding to this.
Thank you, council. Okay, we have a motion on the table. No further discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion fails. We will move on to item 6.3. Public hearing on repealing chapter 48 vegetation of the Code of Ordinances and adopting a new chapter 48 vegetation inclusive of provisions relating to approved heritage and protected trees, planting, removing, and care of trees and landscape maintenance, and setting a penalty for violations. It is 7:14. We're going to open the public hearing. If there's nobody to speak, we will close the public hearing at 7:14 as well. And next up, we have item 6.4, discussion and possible action on ordinance number 2023-07-11-A. Repealing chapter 48 vegetation of the Code of Ordinances and adopting a new chapter 48 vegetation inclusive of provisions relating to the approved heritage and protected trees, planting, removing, and care of trees and landscape maintenance, and setting a penalty for violations. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. This in regards to the work that the Architectural Review Committee did over the last year. I know we spoke extensively last meeting, and then y'all had directed to do a public hearing. I think if you have any further questions, Chairman Middleman here for the ARC is here as well. I know that we did, Mr. Schnall programmed in language based on Councilman May's request for the Heritage Fund and how that would be directed under that proposed language. So if you have any questions, please let us know from Mr. Schnall on that particular, or Mr. Middleman from the ARC.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Council, Mr. Joyce.
Mayor, I move that we approve ordinance number 2023-07-11A, repealing chapter 48 of the Vegetation Code of Ordinances. I do suggest that this be approved with a minor change in section 48-24, which I've discussed with members of the Architecture Review Committee. That section lists 3 exceptions, the third of which applies to residential properties and allows them to remove 3 protectable non-heritage trees each year. And so it seems to me a little bit of a hole in that is, what if somebody needs to remove more trees than that? What if they need to remove 6 or 7, whatever it is, for a swimming pool, whatever it might be? And so therefore, there is what the team has planned is that those extras become part of section 48-25. They have to go by 48-25. But I don't think that's clear. So if I may, at the risk of fouling up the English here, I would propose that in section 48-24, exception 3, the following phrase be added: making improvements upon the property. If more than 3 protectable trees are to be removed, the first 3 may be removed as noted in this exception, with any additional trees to be removed done in accordance with section 48-25. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce, for the motion and the amendment. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. May. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Thank you, Mr. Middleman, for all your hard work. And the entire committee as well. Next up, we have presentation and update on city capital projects. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. You're obviously more audio visually than myself. Okay, everyone hear me? So what I want to do is cover real quick some of the capital projects for next year. Obviously, these projects are funded out of the certificates obligations from 23 based on the election in November that was passed. Real quick, I put here that we've completed phase 1 and 2 of the streets. Phase 2, Banyan, Carrollwood, both of those phases were done. Street reconstruction category CIP, $6 million in 4 years. I would have put a check mark, but we still got a little work. And then going through the FY23 capital projects. If you recall, this is what we use for all of the streets and drainage projects listed by the scope and price of what we were moving forward for this year for the capital projects. I just highlighted Glen Tower there in Carrollwood because we'll come back to those. Those programmed in street dollars for both Carrollwood and Glen Tower there, one at $473,000 for Carrollwood and then $795,000 for Glen Tower. And then on the drainage side, we had programmed $573,000 to continue up Carrollwood. And then when we started this process, we had discussed putting drainage component and or dedicating drainage funds to Glen Tower to address Lock Hill at Glen Tower. The phase 3 of the street improvements. So City of Castle Hills contracted with Ardura, our engineer, to design the they designed the 12 streets, just the roadway portions. We recently authorized myself as city manager to go out for bids last meeting. And so we closed those bids at the end of June, pick a contractor, and we hope to get started at the end of August. And so those are the streets listed there to complete that section of the streets that we had told what we were going to do: Roletto, Peg Sue, Dandelion, Lundblade, Phlox, Parade, Persimmons, Cotillion, in 2 sections. This is Carrollwood here. So the picture there is looking down towards the finished phase 2 of Carrollwood. So we actually had budgeted in to reverse that crown there to put in further culverts halfway up Carrollwood and then do roadway reconstruction all the way up. So what we looked at, and I'll ask the mayor to kind of jump in anytime. We've had a series of conversations with City of San Antonio, Bexar County over the last year about how we can fix Lock Hill. And so the idea was that we could gravitate at the scope of addressing the majority of that water from the basin across Carrollwood, and then eventually running culverts all the way up Carrollwood and capturing that water underneath Lock Hill. And it goes all the way down to tie into phase 1 and 2. So the idea here is that the improvements would tie into phase 1 and 2. The drainage funds from Glen Tower we would shift those to Carrollwood, extending to Lock Hill. And then the Carrollwood drainage funds already established in the 2023 COs, which we carved out about $573,000 for the drainage, which is from 205 Carrollwood to about 215. And then the street portion, we had earmarked $475,000, 205 to 215 Carrollwood.
Mr. Rapley, I'm going to jump in there.
Yes.
Council, just to clarify, we had originally discussed doing drainage at Glen Tower and Lock Hill Selma because there's an area of street there that particularly holds water, and I say holds, and it's for days. I see Ms. McClellan nodding her head because she knows what I'm talking about. And so the problem is Glen Tower itself doesn't really have drainage issues. It's just that area. Well, and the city manager and I's conversations with the city of San Antonio, they have agreed to make some corrections and adjustments to that drainage system to allow it to flow. And so the idea became if we could reallocate those drainage dollars to finish Carrollwood, maybe we can address the issues for once and for all. Obviously, the Carrollwood drainage project was designed to be completed all the way upstream at some point, but it's been cost prohibitive up until now. Now, thankfully, that the residents have approved the certificates of obligation and allowing us to go out for additional dollars. And we've also had great conversations with City of San Antonio and Bexar County. City of San Antonio, Mayor Nuremberg has specifically said that they cannot invest inside the city of Castle Hills, but what they can do is help us with the portion directly outside. So going underneath Lock Hill Selma, a catch basin and that field across the street so that these small rains aren't as problematic. I'll be fully transparent that with the 25, 50 or 100-year rains, we are still going to have water over the street, I assume. Mr. Sandifer's here from Ardura, and he's nodding his head in approval. But the idea is that the smallest rains won't be as problematic. The 5 to 10 years aren't going to cause chaos. And then the bigger rains are going to be more tolerable and not going up into people's yards. To Mr. Rapley's point, the conversations we've had with the city of San Antonio, Mayor Nuremberg, Bear County, Judge Sakai, and our local representatives, it was formerly Councilman Bravo and recently Commissioner Moody, they've all been supportive of this. They know that this is an area that's been neglected. And truthfully, they're very appreciative of us coming forward and wanting to have a collaborative approach, specifically where Castle Hills has money invested as well. I think historically, we've had our share of challenges financially, politically. And so now that we've shown stability, thanks to you all, thanks to the city staff, we look like a worthy investment. And you look at our recent AA credit rating, that's not just from optics. Our books show that as well. And so coming full circle, the idea was that maybe we can, if we're going to go to the well and ask for this money, let's do it for our most problematic issue, which is Carrollwood. And so the promise to the voters was that we would take care of Glen Tower and Lock Hill, and that's still the plan. And so that's where we are now. Just a reallocation, but not reallocating the efforts. We're just reallocating some of the dollars. Mr. Rapley.
All right, thank you, Mayor.
Could I ask a question before you go on to the next slide? So what does this do in terms of a timeline for Glen Tower? Because my understanding is, although, and I applaud the efforts of the mayor to engage the city and the county, city of San Antonio and the county to be involved in this, there's not an actual commitment of dollars. So what does this do to, in a timeline for getting work done on Glen Tower?
So we fall into the city and the county's budget, which is obviously going to push things back. One of the discussions that we've had with Judge Sakai, and I believe with the director, Mr. Reyna, was advanced funding agreement, or not an advanced funding agreement, just a funding agreement, in that, you know, the city of Castle Hills has the reserves to get started, and the expense wouldn't come all at once. So the idea is that we could get a approved funding agreement from the city of San Antonio or Bear County, so that they already are allocating the dollars, but the dollars would actually come later. So that would allow us to start, and those dollars would parse in afterwards. There was a little bit of a delay on Glen Tower because we want to make sure that we are getting the city of San Antonio to take care of that issue. But I think Mr. Rapley had a plan for that.
Yeah, I will talk about that future. I mean, I have further slides to go through that. Sorry. So when we talk about, I think I missed a slide here. Sorry. Going back here, so we have the final phase. Sorry, I skipped this slide, but final phase consists of street reconstruction with potential components. So you have Carrollwood and North Manton, with both have drainage components. So that's why I'm kind of doing this update tonight, is because on the agenda, we have the proposal for Ardura to get started on the design for Carrollwood, and our new engineers have to get started on the design for North Manton. Now, Ardura is already doing the reconstruction design for the roadways already. So they'll incorporate, for instance, the design HAP is doing. And so we're trying to do this simultaneously and move this projects or move these projects quicker from that standpoint. So as I mentioned here, the city of Castle Hills, obviously, as the mayor mentioned, we're working on the funding agreement, but the city of San Antonio also is committed to fixing that portion of Glen Tower that is ponding. So that's the idea, is we want them to do this. They said they would do it later this year. They've committed to it and doing it in-house with their contractor, with their own engineers to do this, to improve that area, and that'll alleviate the drainage component. So then as a result, the drainage priority would be shifted, as we mentioned, to Carrollwood here. And so what we would look at doing is we're bidding phase 3 right now of the 9 streets. Most of those streets are somewhat comparable in size, and we're estimating about 1.8 million. The next phase would involve Carrollwood, North Manton, and Glen Tower. And the idea is that we would maximize the bid for a contractor to bid on, the competitiveness that we would basically be putting in Glen Tower, because Glen Tower is almost 800,000 reconstructed. So they would be able to, we get probably better pricing according to our engineers by adding that in with the other 2 streets in that area,
The economies of scale.
economies of scale. And so that would be the plan right now moving forward. And that's why those are on the next 2 agenda items. And that's, again, why I wanted to give you all an update, because we talked about shifting the drainage dollars only to Carrollwood, no longer Glen Tower, and just bidding Glen Tower as a reconstructed street as a part of this next phase to maximize it. And if we could get sooner, City of San Antonio starts working on there. We see some movement a little bit, then we can, I'd hate to bid out Glen Tower by itself. From that standpoint, I'd rather group it in here, and our engineers recommend that. And so that's why I said here, Glen Tower, Carrollwood, and North Mantle would close out the full category in our CIP. So by the end of next year, 2024, the reconstruction category that was $10 million identified 5 years ago is done with these last 3 streets with the drainage components. Does that answer your question, Councilman?
Thank you. Yes.
So, sorry, I went fast and ahead.
No, and I have to say that the most wonderful thing about this presentation is the very last bullet there, that this has been long in coming, and a lot of people deserve a lot of credit for the work that's gone into making this happen. So thank you.
And to give you a timeline again, we're hoping that Ardura and Half could get the design done the next few months, and then we'd be bidding out this next phase later this year for all 3 streets in one bid package.
And just to go back on something you glossed over, road work would start in maybe August, September
For,
for the 9 streets.
yeah, we're targeting at the end of August. So the bids are due on, I think, July 27th. So then we would select the contractor, move forward the August council meeting, and then a few weeks later, start the pre-construction.
And so before, the end of the year's up, we will have a lot of shovels in the dirt and making our progress towards getting all reconstructed streets done. So it's no small feat. Yes, sir, Mr. Joyce.
Mr. Rapley, did I understand you right that it sounds like we're dependent on San Antonio to complete some of their work before we can start ours in a certain piece of it?
Well, I don't think we can receive any funding till after October 1st, till their new budget starts. So after October 1st, I think that's when they can give us a commitment for dollars in their new fiscal year, as the mayor mentioned.
Right, but they're going to be doing a portion of the work themselves, right? Didn't you say in-house force?
I think
Yes.
you're talking specifically about Glen Tower and Lock Hill. And
Yeah.
honestly, Mr. Joyce, it's trust but verify. San Antonio is committed to it, but till
Well,
we see work getting done, that'll give us the peace of mind that we're in a position to shift.
Well, my ultimate question is, can the schedule be part of the agreement with them? In other words, they agree to pay us back a certain number of dollars, and they agree to this schedule. They will
Oh, I
start
see
by a
what you're
certain
saying.
date and finish by a certain date, so we don't get held up.
I'm sure that's something we can discuss with them. I mean, it's a matter of putting the language or the correct language in the agreement to get that going.
It just makes me a little nervous. I mean, I know you guys have wonderful relationships. That's a wonderful thing, but stuff happens, especially in construction. Anyway, food for thought.
Thank you, sir.
Well, again, that's why moving forward with the phase 3, just solely street reconstruction, doesn't hold up any other progress. So we move forward with these 9 streets, and then we have the next phase which gives us a little time to be able to package this correctly, give San Antonio a little time to address that drainage problem right there on Lock Hill next to Glen Tower. And then we concentrate on Carrollwood, and getting that water from the basin underneath the street all the way down to the work that we've already done.
Good. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Okay, next up, we have discussion and possible action on authorizing the city to enter into a contract with Ardura Group, Inc. to design drainage components for the Carrollwood Phase 3 and authorizing the city manager to sign such a contract. That's what we just discussed in the agenda item before. One thing that I do want to point out, just being cautious, is if for whatever reason this drainage Phase 3 is cost prohibitive, we can always parse it out once the engineering is done, specifically going forward. Because we know that this needs to be done regardless. This is an investment that we need to make.
And I think, Mayor, this will give us a full design of Carrollwood. And again, if there may be other funding opportunities that we come to us that we're sort of shovel ready, engineer ready, we can add this to the potential list for outside funding opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Do we have a motion? Mr. May,
Mr. Mayor, I move that we authorize the city manager to enter into a contract with Endura Group to design drainage components for Carrollwood Phase 3.
thank you, sir. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Joyce. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Next up, we have item 6.7, discussion and possible action authorizing the city to enter into a contract with Half Engineering to design drainage improvements on North Manton and authorizing the city manager to sign such a contract. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, as I showed on the CIP, we had cost or estimated that it would be 560 some thousand, I think 565 for the drainage improvements on North Manton. The idea was raising the street, putting box culverts underneath, and then doing the reconstruction to the rest of the street. Our new engineer Half will be moving forward with designing that, and they'll be working with Ardura for the rest of basically the road reconstruction portion. And so that's why it's important our two engineers are going to work together to package the final phase, which encompasses North Manton now with Carrollwood and the other street, Glen Tower.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Council, do we have a motion? Mr. May, they're going to let you make all of them?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we authorize the city manager to contract with Half Engineering. Is this the item we're referring to?
Yes, sir.
Yes. To design the drainage improvements on North Manton and to sign such contract.
Thank you, Mr. May. Do we have a second? And Ms. Haley, thank you. Any discussion? Mr. Rapley?
And Mayor, just on a time frame, I know it was mentioned last time. I think it's going to be about 3 months for them to finish the design on Carrollwood, roughly, give or take. And then Half believes they can probably do this in about 45 days. So we can start wrapping up the engineering of this in less than 3 months on
Perfect.
both streets.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Okay, next up, we have discussion of possible action on authorizing the city to enter into a contract with Ardura Group, Inc. for architectural and engineering assessment for the city of Castle Hills City Hall, and authorizing city manager to sign such a contract. Mr. Rapley.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I know we've had many discussions with you all as far as having the building looked at, both structurally, foundation, to see if it can be retrofit for improvements down the road, to see if it's cost effective. And so this assessment that would be done would provide that to see if we wanted to do further improvements to the building, add offices like we talked about, a number of modifications that, I know Councilman Joyce and Mr. Middleman have done some renderings, but this will give us an idea of if it's possible or not to do any improvements, or one day if we have to looking at a new city hall, they will give us that perspective as part of that report as well. I know Mr. Joyce has some input on this.
Mr. Joyce.
Thank you. As you all may recall, this potential renovation or replacement of this building is one of the priorities of the comprehensive plan. So if we ever want to renovate this building, we really need to know what is the status of the existing systems, the foundation, the architectural elements, the brick doors, all of the different systems. And so we really need to know what condition they're in and how much useful life, if any, they have in them. And so the question that in my mind, this analysis will answer for us is it worth sinking any money at all into this building? And I think that's really important information that we would need before we would make such a decision. So anyway, I'm in favor of this, and I guess maybe this is the appropriate time to I move that we authorize the city to enter a contract with Ardura for architectural and engineering services building assessment for the Castle Hills City Hall building.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Joyce and a second by Mr. May. Any discussion? Mr. Rapley, and this might be a question for you, Mr. Sandifer, but part of this is, just to give context to everybody here, historically in Castle Hills, we've just put up walls as needed. And so my question to the city manager was, what's the plan? What are we doing? You know, we had some additional ARPA funds and there was discussion of a conference room. Well, why are we continuing to invest money into this building haphazardly if we don't know what we're doing? And so that was really the genesis of doing this assessment to figure out, maybe this is the building that we're going to keep. And that if that's the case, let's put together a long-term plan and be able to have phases to that plan so that we're not having to throw good money after bad and move a wall that we just put up. To that point, and my question is, for the structural component, I would assume that, or I'm asking if we can do that one first, because if it's determined that structurally the building cannot sustain anything else, I think that would preclude us from going forward. But does that make sense? Is it possible that we can have the structural component go first? Okay, perfect. And that's, if that is the case, and we find out that the slab can't sustain additional weight, there's no sense in assessing the mechanical or the electrical or the plumbing, and hopefully we can save the structural component itself is $9,500, which is almost a little over a third of that. So hopefully we can save some money if that does happen to be the case. And thank you, Mr. Joyce, for spearheading this.
You're welcome.
Okay, council, we have a motion. We have a second. All in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Next up, we have item 6.9, conduct a budget work session number 1 for FY 2024 city budget. Mr. Rapley.
Might have to get a stool up here.
Oh,
Can you, sorry, Mayor, can you cue that up, sir?
is it on the desktop, Mr. Rapley?
It is under revenue. There you go. Thank you, Mayor. All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council. This will kick off our budget season and going over revenue. Going to, as we go through this process, emphasize that we are doing a 9-month budget because the numbers will look different. I don't want people to think we lost money or that it's something that's necessarily bad. It's just what our intent to do is to have a shortened budget to get back to a normal fiscal year, like many cities, states, federal, from that standpoint. So go through. So I wanted to give you a quick overview, preliminary revenues in the 9-month budget, excluding property tax right now. We'll be working on that in a couple weeks with Ms. Davis and Ms. Wallace on working on the actual rate and then figuring out the dollars associated with that. Sales tax, mixed beverage, franchise fees, court fees, permits, police, fire revenue, garbage collection revenue, passports are our other main revenues. And then we'll talk about anything the council would like to see as we move forward with goals and objectives. Again, emphasizing the 9-month budget starting January 1st through September 30th, 2024. And then give everyone a meeting schedule as we have already adopted the budget schedule. So sales tax, again, the adopted amount was $1,445,000. current collections are projected towards 1.5 million right now. We're about 1.3 on a 5-year average, and we're about 8% up this time last year in collections. For the 9-month, we are projecting 1,125,000. And then for the mixed beverage tax proposed 26,000. Again, we're hopeful that there's some new restaurants and other commercial businesses that open up that's going to help with both tax and mixed beverage here sooner than later. So we hope to account for those, and we'll be optimistic, and we'll monitor as we continue to adopt the 24 budget. We are optimistic, and staff, we do have some future retail in the pipeline that we're working on, but we're hoping that that might not come to fruition for about 3 to 6 months. We do have some businesses opening up here soon that are in the process, and then hopefully another big retail project down the road that's going to help with the growth in the sales tax base. Franchise fees, those are pretty straightforward. We projected 475,000 in the budget, and we're looking at going to meet that 475. For the 24 budget, we're proposing in the 9-month 319, and then a total breakdown of 356 out of those 4 franchise fee providers that pay the city. This is the court revenue here. We are on track. We budgeted 750,000. Our projected ending is about 640. So we're a little bit down on the court side for revenue. I would say some of that has to do with trying to fill our vacancies in PD and then actively look for a traffic enforcement officer. Obviously, when we put together that budget last year, we did have a very active traffic enforcement officer who was doing a great job at the time. And so we were projecting much higher last year for that. And so I think as I'm talking to the chief and we level off as far as adding officers, this will allow additional enforcement in some of the shifts once we start adding additional officers. Correct, Chief? But right now we are looking at 479,250 for the 9-month budget in court. This is preliminary revenues for the fire, for the permit fees, inspections, and licenses. We incorporated the plan review for fire inspections, COs, and so that's added into the revenue. We are targeting at the end of the year for the entire category about 270,000 projected ending. We projected about 283 from that standpoint. And for the entire category there for revenue, which covers permits, food license, liquor license, fees for hearings, abatement collections, certificates of occupancy, animal impound registration, about 190,000, 950 for that 9-month budget. Preliminary revenues for garbage collection, we're obviously on target for that. As you recall, council, you did a multi-year phase of the rate to increase not only for operational expenses, but for the landfill costs. So landfills have fees have increased significantly the last 5 years. So we've had to increase the landfill line item from that standpoint. The city's phased in fee from, I think we did a 50 cents and then the $1.50 got us to 27.50 now. And so it's become sort of a sustainable fund towards garbage collection revenue that meets our operation expenses. We're going to get an updated cost for landfill, so we'll be able to probe that in from Waste Management here soon. And so that'll be the new rate from Waste Management will be programmed into the fiscal, to the FY24 proposed budget. And as a result of the increase that was phased in, its services haven't changed, but we added the quarterly roll-offs to City Hall for brush collection. And then we added the bulk drop-off events as part of it. For the garbage fees, we're on target to meet the 526,000 revenue by the end of the year. And then we're proposing for the 9 month, 408,000, 75,000 for 75 for the 9 month budget. These are the remaining revenues within the general fund: fire alarms, restitution, report fees, revenue rescue, miscellaneous credit card fees. Those seem to be on target and to meet the projected year endings. Interest, we budgeted 30,000, and right now mid-year we're at 116,000 in collection of revenue for interest. We see it being 130,000 by the end of this year, so we're proposing 70,000 next year in that 9 month budget. Interest rates are up. We're earning interest on all accounts across the board, so that's helped considerably with that line item and growth in revenue for that for the interest line item. And then passports, we're currently on pace to do over 30,000 in passports this year, and then we're targeting about 22,500 next year in the 9 month budget. Here's an overall summary. And I think back when we were talking about the TMRS, why I see growth in some of these revenue categories and optimistic. These are the projections year in. So we are looking about 300,000, even though some of those are down in, say, court permit a little bit. Most of those others are up to almost over 300,000 right there, and potential projected revenue at the end of the year. And then there's the column for the 9 month proposed budget with all the revenues. Like I said, property tax will be to be determined. Moving forward in the budget, we'll know on the property tax here soon. Future COLA salary adjustments to be determined. We're probably not looking for additional personnel in any of the departments. Moving forward, we'll have to do the re-rate for our health insurance, capital equipment, if any of our departments are in need of capital equipment, but I think we may cover those through additional funds in other areas that we have. Future capital projects, additional revenue of expenses and revenue line items, special revenue funds, and then we'll cover ARPA again to show what we're at on ARPA and work with y'all as council to figure out some projects moving forward. So I put here on council's goals and objectives because from the start, you had asked me to come back, working to try to get the 2-to-1 plan in there for us to be competitive for not only recruitment, but retention purposes. Review of public safety, I put compensation, police and fire. I know that we talked about coming back and looking at the police salaries again to ensure we're competitive. I put health insurance re-rate, and then quality of life projects, again, talking about improvements to the commons and then implementation of items from the comprehensive plan that we want to get started with through the Parks and Projects Committee. Next meetings, I just put here, obviously next week we have special meetings with the budget, 2nd and 3rd. We're going to kind of go over TMRS again. I had it listed as an idea to talk about that a little bit more. ARPA special funds. And then the next one would be dedicated to the departments, looking at sort of the current salaries and what we project next year's current salaries look like. I was kind of mix it up a little bit because I know the departments all did their own presentation, talked about what they do and what they want. But I think in this truncated budget season of doing a 9-month budget, we're going to work on sort of those priorities and figure out the needs. And if necessary, if we have to put something off, we have to put something off. Because again, I'll speak to the priority from the city manager and staff's perspective is, making sure that we can do this 2-to-1, making sure that we carve out some dollars towards COLAs, and then making sure that we're, again, competitive with salaries with other cities from that standpoint. And then we'll get the tax roll hopefully July 25th. And then I am supposed to deliver the budget on August 1st. And then receive the no new revenue and voter approval tax rate calculations. August 8th, possible workshop, discuss tax rate. And then I put down The 15th and 22nd is possible budget workshops if necessary. And then Tuesday, September 5th, schedule an announced meeting to adopt the tax rate. And then Tuesday, September 12th, adopt the budget and the tax rate. And I think that summarizes everything for the FY24. Again, I'm going to emphasize that this is a 9-month budget. It's going to look different because we do use the 5-year historical. And I just don't want it to be a shock when somebody thinks that we lost money across the board. I want to make sure that there's an understanding that we are doing this condensed budget to get back on track with normal cities, I like to call it. Mayor, Council, you have any questions?
Mr. Joyce?
Mr. Apley, am I reading your preliminary revenue summary correctly? It's the one that looks at everything,
The composite, yes, sir.
this one.
Yes,
Is it fair to say, when you look at the change column, the next to last column, and kind of do a quick little bit of math, is it fair to say that our revenue is approximately $400,000 higher than we thought it was going to be?
close to that. I don't have the exact calculation.
Approximately.
385 minus the 40, so upper 300s.
And Mr. Joyce, if I can just ask a quick question on the heels of that. Is that because of salary positions that weren't filled as well?
No, this has nothing to do with salaries, and this is straight revenue.
Okay.
This is just us being above what our target was that we adopted for revenues in the general fund.
Gotcha.
So in the areas that were over revenue, I'd say, I'm sorry, I projected wrong.
Any further questions, council? Ms. Haley?
So if we had had this presentation before we had the TMRS discussion, would that have made anybody more comfortable with going ahead and saying, let's proceed with that? I mean, I felt like I wanted to do that and then thought again about we should look at the numbers first. And now, I mean, our revenue is up. I'd like to just say, let's get that back on the agenda and we don't leave this with the impression that this is going to keep on being delayed for the sake of our people. That's all I want to say. And I think you've done a great job preparing all of this, and that's all. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, but I have to say it was Miss Davis and Miss Wallace, so,
Well, that goes without saying that it was Miss Davis, but anyhow, I just thank you for saying it.
Yeah, so, but, again, we'll determine the tax, the ad valorem collections as well. So that's where we're optimistic. Again, you all lowered the tax rate by 2 cents last year. And so we need to see what that looks like coming in and to see if there's any adjustments necessary. Just offhand and talking to our financial advisors and discussing debt payment and all that, they don't think there's an issue with what it might look like in potential tax rates and early valuations that have come in. So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rapley. Thank you, council. Next up, we have discussion and possible action on an appointment to fill the vacancy for place 1 on city council. Mr. Rapley?
Mayor and council, we provided Maria and provided y'all 2 applications that came in. Y'all had requested an application process to be determined at this meeting to fill place 1 vacancy. Last chance, Councilman Isbrand. So, we'll talk to Sig about that. But this application process, the deadline was last Thursday, 5 p.m. Ms. Franco sent you the 2 applications that were submitted for consideration. I believe you have both of those in front of you. So it's a matter of who council selects at this point.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Rapley. I do feel very fortunate that we have 2 qualified applicants that submitted applications. I think it shows that the city's in a good place. Mr. Isbrand, I Wanted to see if you had any comments. Considering this would be your successor.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. Certainly, it's the prerogative of the council to make it the determination on this. I will wholeheartedly concur with you, Mayor, that I think we're very fortunate to have two very strong candidates and two individuals who are willing to step forward to help serve the city. And I'm grateful to both of them for their willingness to raise their hand, and would ask that irrespective of the decision that council makes tonight, that they would both commit to continuing to move forward to fulfill an interest in serving our community. I think that we would be fortunate to have their experience here. And I hope that that will be the case. I will say that from my point of view, at looking at both of the candidates, and again, you know, with very impressive resumes, and listening to the discussion that we have tonight, we have very complex issues coming up for the city, not the least of which, of course, is the budget and the fast pace at which everything will be taking place there. So you really, I believe, you know, should be looking for someone who can hit the ground running, who has some institutional knowledge, who has some, you know, awareness of the issues and engagement with them. And that's not to suggest that anyone here doesn't. But it does strike me that when I look at the kinds of things that you have coming up and the importance of that, that someone who has already served the city in the capacity of having been on a board, committee, or commission is someone who probably brings some desirable awareness to this that would be very helpful to you. And in this case, I think we understand that, you know, Mr. Smith has served on the architectural review before. And I also, when I spoke to him, I made the comment to him that, you know, I've observed how he comes to all of our meetings and he sits there and he diligently takes notes. And I've often wondered what it is he's writing in those notes, kind of thing. And is he writing about us, or is he writing about the actions being taken? And it just strikes me that given the rapid pace at which you all need to keep moving forward, that someone with the experience, the awareness, the engagement that is already there with Mr. Jason Smith would be someone to appropriately consider as my replacement.
Thank you, Mr. Isbrand. Council? Mr. May?
I think we have to have a motion, so I will make that motion. And I will nominate Jason Smith.
Thank you, Mr. May. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. Joyce. Any discussion? Mr. Joyce?
Thank you, Mayor. My comments are similar to Mr. Isbrand's. We have two terrific candidates. And I've had the opportunity to visit both of Mr. Smith and Ms. Calderon, and I'm truly impressed with their talent, their level-headedness, and dedication to serving our community. But I'm entering my fourth year on council here. I recall a few times, tonight might be one of them, where we had really difficult decision or choice to make. And this is one of those times. But a choice must be made, and I agree with the nomination for Mr. Smith, but at the same time, encourage Ms. Calderon to channel her own strategic and organizational skills to the community organization, the Women's Club, perhaps even the Business Association. I think should be a great asset, and we'd welcome her to serving our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. I do want to make present the fact that we have both applicants here, and I thank both of them. And I regardless of which way it goes, I would encourage either one of you to stay involved and find a way to get deeper involved in the city. And I appreciate you putting your name out there. Any further comments, council? Okay, we have a motion by Mr. May, a second by Mr. Joyce. All in favor from Mr. Smith? Unanimous. Thank you so much, council. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for raising your hand to serve, and thank you, Ms. Galliano, for putting your name out there as well. Next up, we have a discussion and possible action on the appointments to the Economic Development Committee. Mr. Joyce.
As you all know, we've been looking for EDC candidates since the early part of the year. And it's been advertised on the website, and I know many of us have made personal invitations to potential candidates. And if I may, just take a quick moment, I'm pretty good at being quick. Preferred qualifications of our candidates. I think the most important of these is, first of all, they must believe that the development of our city's revenue stream and ultimately quality of life here in Castle Hills is a primary priority. Second, they must have a team mentality and be willing to work for consensus building. Third, they must be able to keep business prospects or other vital information confidential when necessary. Fourth, preferred to have served in leadership roles in an organization. And finally, must be willing to represent the EDC to the public or private sector and advocate for the city of Castle Hills in the business community. At this point, we have a total of 7 candidates, which dovetails nicely with the need for 5 members and 2 alternates. I think we have a nice mix of expertise, experience, and youthful enthusiasm to make for a talented EDC. I have personally visited with all but one of the candidates, and if I may just offer some very quick thoughts on them. Mr. Bells and Mr. Keith were introduced to me by Mr. Rapley, who had met them at City Hall. They're both young, married, raising children with lots of energy and enthusiasm for the possibilities of the committee. Mr. Bells is an insurance executive and Mr. Keith a manager for the city of San Antonio, so they have leadership experience that we need. John and Elise Russ are the chefs and owners of Clementine. They believe, as I do, that they could help with the economic growth of the city. They have terrific ideas for this, including the idea of an incubator space for culinary concepts, helping to connect the city to start up food and beverage concepts, and bringing in regional or national media to highlight the food and beverage scene in Castle Hills. Now, they have proposed participating in a tag team fashion based on their availability. I'm not quite sure how that would work with the ordinance, but perhaps Mr. Schnall can guide us on that. Mike Poole is a longtime Castle Hills resident and business owner. He owns an outdoor display company and sign service company in the San Antonio area. Mike is very enthusiastic about the possibilities of EDC and would give the committee the real world experience of owning a business. Steve Uriel is a SVP at the Bank of San Antonio and has spoken at one of our Business Association mixers. He specializes in business banking and could bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the team with knowledge of lending conditions, interest rates, and trends in business banking. Should it be council's pleasure to nominate Steve, we would have to make a minor adjustment to the ordinance as he is neither a resident nor business owner in Castle Hills. Ernest Brown is a 40-year commercial real estate broker in the San Antonio area with a wealth of experience in the office, retail, and industrial sectors. Ernest lent his time to our city during our comprehensive plan process, offering his thoughts on the desirability of Castle Hills real estate during the speaker's forum. Full disclosure, Ernest and I have known one another since the 1980s and are partners in a local real estate venture. Amy McClin is a talented attorney who has given much of her time to our city, including a stint on city council and numerous other committees. She is well known to you all, having been the chair of the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, presenting a number of times during the process. And the only other suggestion is I believe Mr. Rapley has Mr. Zamaron suggested as a staff liaison, which makes perfect sense because he's the one that all the people talk to when they want to learn about zoning and availability in Castle Hills. And I believe that yours truly has been designated as the council liaison. I'm not sure, but that would be I would like to do that if it would be council's pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. And Mr. Isbrand, yes, sir.
I had a question about these appointments. When we established the Economic Development Committee, I don't believe we set a protocol on how they would be appointed. And with each of our boards, committees and commissions, except where statutorily we're required to do it another way. We have had each council member have one appointee to it. And then the mayor defines who the chair is and has one of the alternates. Is it the intention here that this remain the process, and do we need to memorialize that as the process? So going forward, there's a clarity to it.
Mr. May?
Am I missing something? I thought resolution 2022-11.
Yeah, it's in the packet. It covered the appointment
eight.
process.
The answer to your question is yes.
Okay,
To
This
do
was,
it in the.
this was done in November of 2022.
okay, thank you. Okay,
Each alderman shall appoint one member to the Castle Hills Economic Development Committee, whose place and term on the committee shall correspond to the place and term of the appointing alderman. The mayor shall appoint a chairman from among the members of the committee appointed by each alderman, and 2 alternates, one appointed by the mayor and the other appointed by the council at large. It does pretty much track what we've done for the other commissions. And I don't recognize any of these applicant names that Mr. Joyce read as being on a current commission or board, because that would also disqualify someone. Mr. Joyce did make a comment that one of the applicants doesn't meet our technical requirement. It's not really technical. It's what's in y'all's ordinance resolution creating this committee. 5 members, 2 alternates, all of whom shall be residents of the city of Castle Hills or owners of a business or businesses operating in the city of Castle Hills. We could modify that language to change it from owners of businesses to employees or owners of businesses, but that's not on the agenda for tonight. We'd have to bring that back at a future meeting in order to do that, to allow the gentleman who works for the bank to be on this committee. But there are at least 6 other applicants, and there are 5 members of the governing body. Ms. Daines is not present, so that space will need to be filled at a future meeting as well.
thank you for refreshing my memory, Mr. Schnell. I remember us talking about it. I didn't recall the action on them. Thank you.
Okay, council. Would we like to make any appointments tonight? Mr. Isbrand?
I will defer the place 1 appointment to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Isbrand. Ms. Haley?
I think we should clarify the resolution and do it all in a clean vote. And when Ms. Daines is here, and I know you want to move forward tonight, but I would hate that one of our best corporate citizens, Mr. Villarreal, wouldn't be able to be appointed and get started tonight. I mean, things are going to be delayed anyway, and I would suggest that we delay this.
Is that a motion to postpone till our next
Motion
meeting?
to postpone until we can clarify our resolution and have Ms. Daines here and have Mr. Smith in place to make his appointment.
Should we do it next week? Well, I'll second that, excuse me.
Could we do it during our budget meeting, a different meeting?
There is no discussion on a motion. Your motion is construed by
Oh,
me, I guess, as the parliamentarian, as a motion to table. As soon as
Okay.
Mr. Joyce seconded the motion to table, there can be no discussion
Okay.
of the motion. After the motion is acted on, there can be a brief discussion,
okay.
but you can't discuss the motion itself. So Mayor, you have a motion and a second to table this matter to a future council meeting. You need to take a vote.
Perfect, thank you. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Schnell, and thank you.
And then Mayor, I believe we had a comment or a request from a council member to do this at the next meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, as soon as possible.
Okay.
Can I ask a clarification? Next regularly scheduled meeting or the next meeting of the city council period?
The next meeting of the city council period,
So
if we
at-
can get it
at the
done
budget hearing.
next Tuesday,
Thank you.
if possible. And if Ms. Daines is back from, well, if she's feeling well.
Okay, thank you, council. Next up, our last agenda item, discussion and possible action on resolution number 2023-07-11 to establish a donation acceptance policy for the city of Castle Hills. The impetus to this was I had a friend and neighbor reach out that they made public art and that they wanted to donate it to the city for us to enjoy. And when I mentioned it to Mr. Rapley, he suggested that we have a policy in place to help facilitate that. And so that is what you have here in front of you. Obviously, it might use your professional lenses for some adjustments, but I did want to put something in front of you so that we could move forward and potentially discuss this generous offer that we have in front of us. Mr. Rapley, did I miss anything?
Yes, I think Mr. Schnall can add anything to it, but it basically establishes a donation policy that didn't prior exist for the city to be able to accept gifts in a certain manner. Correct, Mr. Schnall?
This proposed ordinance or proposed, I can't remember now, it's an ordinance or a resolution. I think I did it as a resolution. The resolution would create this procedure to be followed. The idea being that unless it's cash, it probably needs to be considered by the city council. And there's then some criteria and some questions that should be considered to help staff make a recommendation as to something like this. This is similar to a policy that I worked on some years ago for another city. But it was, needed some adjustment and reworking. And so this was put together in about an hour and a half, one day last week after the mayor had asked for this to be ready for this council meeting. So there's really no pride of authorship. And if anyone is comfortable with, if everyone's comfortable with it, great, y'all can proceed now. If you want more time, then I would suggest that we indulge Mr. Rapley to put this on a future agenda, whether for a special meeting or the next regular meeting. I know y'all really have only had 72 hours to see it.
Ms. Haley?
I move that we accept this policy, go back to whatever the agenda item is, that I'm supposed to do this correctly. Hold on. I move that we we adopt the resolution number 2023-0711 to establish a donation acceptance policy for the city of Castle Hills.
Thank you, Ms. Haley. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. May. Any further discussion? All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, council. Okay, that wraps up our agenda. We've already made announcements. So, it is 8:16. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
We'll let you have the second, maybe, Mr. Isbrand.
I'm
Hopefully.
sorry.
I'll second that.
Okay.
I totally-
I have a motion by Mr. May and the second by Mr. Isbrand. All in favor? Unanimous. Meeting is adjourned 8:16. Everybody have a good evening. Thank you again, Mr. Isbrand.